parents built. She threw my luggage into the muddy driveway, looked me dead in the eye, and called me a parasite. She screamed that I had bled her father dry for 10 years and that it was finally time for the real family to take back what was theirs. The worst part wasn't her cruelty. It was my husband standing right behind her, staring at the floor in cowardly silence. They genuinely thought they had broken me. They thought a 52-year-old woman would just curl up and disappear. As I threw my bags into my car and drove away in the pouring rain, I didn't cry. Instead, I pulled over, opened my laptop, and quietly logged into my accounts. I didn't argue. I just canceled everything. And exactly at 8 a.m. the next morning, their carefully constructed world completely shattered. Standing in the muddy driveway of the estate my parents had spent their entire lives building, I watched the heavy oak front door slam shut with a definitive, echoing thud. The sound resonated deep in my chest, a brutal punctuation mark at the end of a 10-year marriage. My name is Natalie. I am 52 years old, and until 20 minutes ago, I believed I was the matriarch of a family that respected me. Instead, I was standing in the pouring rain, watching my luggage get soaked on the gravel. My stepdaughter, Chloe, had orchestrated the entire spectacle. She had stormed into the house, cornered me in the grand foyer, and unleashed a torrent of vitriol, screaming that I was nothing more than a parasite who had bled her father's wealth dry. But the true betrayal didn't come from Chloe's venom. It came from my husband, Richard. As his daughter threw my bags out into the storm, Richard stood just 2 paces behind her, hands jammed deep into his pockets, staring intently at the hardwood floor in absolute, cowardly silence. What neither of them seemed to remember in their blind greed was a simple, undeniable fact. Richard's failing architectural firm had been completely bankrupt when we met. Every single luxury they enjoyed, the sprawling mansion, the high-end vehicle leases, the country club memberships, and the very air conditioning keeping them warm inside, was entirely funded by my family trust. They genuinely believed that by physically removing me from the premises, they were taking control of the empire. As I loaded my drenched suitcases into the trunk of my car and drove away into the dark, a cold, unyielding clarity completely replaced my grief. They wanted to see what life looked like without a parasite. I was more than happy to show them. I pulled my car into the desolate parking lot of a quiet motel miles away, the steady beat of the windshield wipers the only sound in the dark. I didn't cry. Instead, I opened my laptop, the glow of the screen illuminating the dashboard. Chloe and Richard truly believed they had stripped me of my dignity, entirely oblivious to the reality that they had just severed their own lifeline. They thought they were the masters of the estate, completely forgetting that the luxury lifestyle they flaunted was entirely tethered to my personal corporate entity and bank accounts. Sitting there in the shadows, I systematically began to cut the cords. I logged into my primary business portal and revoked Richard's access to the corporate black cards, immediately flagging them as suspended. Next, I contacted the premium vehicle leasing company, remotely canceling the active authorizations for the high-end SUVs sitting in their driveway. But I didn't stop there. I went into my utility management dashboard and scheduled an immediate service termination for the mansion's massive power, water, and smart security systems. Finally, I contacted my commercial real estate manager to officially halt all rent subsidies for Richard's struggling architectural firm. Every single luxury, every ounce of their social standing, and every basic comfort they took for granted was tied to my signature. By the time I closed my laptop, the digital ledger was clean. I had completely ceased funding the people who had just thrown me out into the rain. The automated system updates were set to sync with the main banking servers at precisely 8 a.m. Their countdown had officially begun. Morning arrived with a deceptive, quiet stillness, but inside the mansion, the clock was ticking down to a disaster they never saw coming. At exactly 8 a.m., the central processing servers synchronized and the digital axis fell. In a single instant, the entire sprawling house went pitch black. The hum of the massive climate control units completely died, replaced by a sudden, heavy silence. The smart security panels blared a single warning tone before freezing, locking the motorized entry gate shut. Upstairs, The premium espresso machines lost power, and the high-speed corporate Wi-Fi network completely vanished, instantly cutting them off from the outside world. Chloe was the first to panic, screaming down the darkened hallway as her phone lost its connection to the smart home app. Richard, still clad in his silk robe, stumbled down to the garage, intending to drive to his office to investigate the blackout. But when he pressed the ignition on his luxury SUV, the digital dashboard merely flashed a bright red error message. Lease authorization revoked. The engine refused to even turn over. Seconds later, his personal phone exploded with automated corporate alerts. His architectural firm's accounts had been completely frozen for non-payment of the corporate insurance and commercial rent subsidies. The absolute reality of their situation began to set in like a physical weight. They were entirely trapped in a multi-million-dollar concrete fortress with no electricity, no running water, no vehicle access, and absolutely zero funds. Richard's hands began to visibly shake as he looked at the dead dashboard. Sweating profusely in the dim garage, he frantically opened his contacts, dialed my number, and waited as the call began to ring. I sat calmly in the corner booth of a quiet local diner, watching the steam rise from my morning tea. When my phone lit up with Richard's name, I let it ring out completely, taking a slow sip. 10 minutes later, the diner's front bell chimed, and Richard burst through the door, looking completely unraveled. His hair was a disheveled mess, his expensive linen shirt was wrinkly, and his face was flushed with a mixture of absolute panic and blind rage. He marched straight over to my table, slamming his hands down onto the polished wood, demanding to know exactly what kind of game I was playing. "What did you do, Natalie?" he hissed, his voice cracking under the weight of his desperation. "The house is dead, the cars won't start, and my corporate accounts are completely locked. You are ruining my business, and you are destroying my daughter's future." I didn't flinch. I slowly set my teacup back down onto its saucer, meeting his frantic, bloodshot eyes with a calm, unyielding stare that instantly made his breath catch in his throat. Several patrons at the surrounding tables turned to whisper, but I didn't care. "I didn't steal a single penny from you, Richard," I replied, my voice dropping to a smooth, icy whisper that cut straight through his anger. "Your daughter made it very clear last night that I am just a parasite who bleeds your family dry. So I simply took her advice. I stopped paying for the roof over your heads, I stopped funding your failing business, and I completely cut off your access to my wealth. If I am truly a parasite, then you and Chloe should have absolutely no problem surviving entirely on your own." Realizing that tears and threats wouldn't sway me, Chloe tried to take a far more aggressive approach. 2 days later, she showed up at my primary family attorney's office, dragging a high-priced corporate lawyer along with her. She marched into the glass-walled conference room with her chin held high, loudly demanding that I sign over what she confidently called the rightful family property. She claimed that my 10 years of marriage didn't give me the right to steal her father's legacy or lock them out of their own home. I sat completely silent at the head of the table, nodding toward my legal team. My attorney calmly slid a thick, bound folder across the polished wood toward Chloe's representative. Inside were the original deeds, bank statements, and corporate bylaws dating back decades. As Chloe smirked, her lawyer opened the file and began to read the fine print. Within seconds, the smug satisfaction completely drained from his face, and his skin turned a stark, sickly pale. He slowly lowered the papers, looking at Chloe with a mixture of pity and absolute dread. "Chloe," he whispered, his voice trembling slightly, "you don't understand. Your father never owned this estate. It belongs entirely to Natalie's family trust, and every single cent your father's firm received was structured as a revocable business loan." My attorney then leaned forward, delivering the final blow. Because Chloe had illegally changed the locks and discarded my personal property, she wasn't getting an inheritance. She was facing massive criminal fraud countersuits and immediate eviction. Chloe stared at her lawyer, her mouth opening and closing in pure, unadulterated terror. The rapid downward spiral of Richard and Chloe over the next few weeks was as absolute as it was public. Deprived of my family trust's financial backing, their fragile illusion of wealth completely evaporated. The foreclosure processes on the luxury mansion began almost immediately as neither of them could afford the massive monthly upkeep or taxes. Richard's architectural firm officially defaulted on its commercial obligations within 14 days, forcing him to liquidate his remaining office equipment just to appease his growing list of angry corporate creditors. The social status they had weaponized against me vanished overnight. Chloe, who had never worked a single day in her life, was forced to face the harsh reality of securing a regular, low-paying retail job just to cover her basic living expenses and pay off her skyrocketing credit card debts. Watching their entitled dynasty crumble wasn't about revenge. It was about the natural law of gravity. When the Real Foundation walks away, the house cards always fall. 3 months later, I stood on the sun-drenched wooden deck of a beautiful, peaceful cottage overlooking the ocean. The air was crisp, the waves were gentle, and for the first time in 10 years, my life belonged entirely to me. I had cut the toxic ties completely, choosing to build a future rooted in peace rather than family drama. Standing out here in the morning sun, I felt an overwhelming sense of freedom, knowing that I had survived their cruelty and proven my true worth. False status and greed had destroyed them, but clarity and independence had completely saved me. Now, I am incredibly curious about all of you who have stayed to listen to my story until the very end. What would you have done if you were in my shoes, and your spouse stood by in silence while their child threw your belongings into the rain and called you a parasite? Would you have walked away as cleanly as I did? Or would you have handled the situation differently? The city you are watching from, so I can see exactly how far my story has traveled across the world. If you enjoyed watching this journey of justice and reclaim, I am leaving 2 other incredible stories on the final screen with unexpected twists, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you so much for your amazing support, and